Chapter 33, The Yiga Hideout. The sun had yet to rise on Gerudo Town when two women set forth from its northern exit, the reins of carefully trained sand seals in their hands. The riders were unpracticed, their footing on their shields perfectly orthodox because they were not experienced enough to have their own style, but the beasts in question were gentle and calm and responsive not just to their motions but to their very moods. The seals moved slowly as their riders became used to the motion, slowly picking up speed as the confidence of the two women built. One woman was dressed in light-colored, breezy layers, loose-fitting pantaloons and long-sleeved tunic letting the wind play across her skin while an opaque head wrap protected her head and neck and face from the sun. Her eyes peeked out at the world, wide and searching as if not used to having a subtle limitation placed on her peripheral vision. She still wore the same boots she'd been wearing upon entering the town. This was the only visible article of clothing she retained from the day before. The outfit was practical, comfortable, left nothing exposed to the light of the sun, and was remarkably cool. There was little doubt, either in the woman or her companion, that this had been a very good investment. The second woman wore the same outfit she'd been wearing for the course of their trip, though she'd adjusted it to protect the previously exposed skin of her shoulders and hands. Amber earrings glittered with fairy magic in the shade of her hat, which was pulled low against the coming of the day. The two of them spoke little as they prepared for the trek north. They checked their gear, their weapons, each other's protection against sunburn, and then turned the sand seals toward the distant canyon. The seals went slowly, and in time the women gave them more rein, and then they flew across the sands more swiftly than a horse might run over a field of grass. After a time, day broke. A little after dawn, 3 more women set out to the north from Gerudo Town, following the trail left by the two preceding them, their sand seals barking in excitement and exertion. The Gerudo Highlands rose in front of them, presenting cliff faces as high or higher than the Great Plateau, stone walls separating the scorching heat of the desert from the frigid flats that lay beyond. The walls went on for kilometers in either direction, unbroken save for one spot where the stone parted and turned in on itself, the mouth of the canyon, they'd been told. They rode the sand seals uphill, to the opening in the stone, and even though the sun was high they found themselves in the shade as the canyon walls vied with each other to smother the sky. The shade was cooler than the open desert had been, of course. "We are close," Pi said, stepping off of her shield and putting it on her back. Zelda tried very hard to listen for anything odd in their surroundings, which was difficult over the sound of the seals' heavy breathing. "We will be there in 2 hours, but we are very close." Zelda nodded and said, "Should we be ready for battle?" Aya stared into the shadows further in the canyon and seemed to wrestle with her response. Zelda fought the urge to scold herself. She'd said we, even though she was the only one who'd have to change clothes for the sake of confrontation. Better just to have done so and be ready. "Not yet." Hi's voice was still low, and Zelda stared at her. "I do not think they will want to meet us here. It's too open." "Too open?" "I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. The Yiga will not attack us until they have every advantage possible. They want you in their hideout. They want you to face them where they are most powerful. You could dress for battle, but we will be exposed to the sun periodically and we will be in more danger from it than from them. We'll move slowly, keeping to the shadows, but I do not think we will run into any guards. They know you're coming, and won't risk open confrontation with you." Zelda scowled, thought it over, decided against donning her guardian-derived armor, and nodded. The sun seals were exactly as well trained as they'd been led to believe. When Zelda put her shield on her back and patted the seal who'd pulled her on its broad neck, it made a low bark and then sank into a restful posture. They'd been told there were limits to how long a sand seal would wait for them, but they were supposed to be very patient. Looking at the quiet grace of one at rest, how it tossed loose sand onto its back with its flippers, Zelda believed it. She had to stop herself from saying goodbye to the animals as they walked away. As Pi suggested, they moved in the shadows, keeping to the spaces beneath jutting rock shells along the canyon walls. They moved quickly, but the going was harder than it would have been at the center, the footing less even. Rarely, Pia would hold up her hand, and Zelda would stop while Pia listened and looked. After a time Pia would determine that there was no threat, and they would move on. The canyon stretched on, and the further they walked the more Zelda became aware of a distant pressure that pressed at her temples. It wasn't a physical effect, she was sure, when she reached for the power to ascertain the source of it. The pressure grew more pronounced rather than less. There's malice ahead, she said to Paya. Paya stopped, turned to listen. A great deal of it. They stood in silence for long moments, the sun wheeling slowly overhead. That stands to reason, Paya said, her voice still barely above a whisper. How the Sheikah could make a whisper carried that way baffled Zelda utterly. The girl who attacked us in Tan, and it took a considerable effort for Zelda not to object to that phrasing, was redolent with Ganon's power. None of the group we met on Death Mountain was so. Between these two attacks, the Yiga must have decided to besiege Ganon for more strength to be added to their own. I wouldn't be surprised if every person we meet has taken the malice into themselves, to greater and lesser extents. Like Nader. The dragon? Yes. The dragon was infected with the malice, too. Their body was changed by it, made different and strange. It took a great deal of power to banish Ganon's influence on them. Paya blinked rapidly several times, and the flash of realization and hope across the silver-haired girl's face twisted at Zelda's heart. She'd said too much again. Promised without knowing she was making promises. Zelda, please forgive me for my presumption, but I don't know if I'll be able to do the same for the Yiga. That was true. She probably could. The principle was essentially the same, but could she know? Nader rejected the infection insofar as they were able. The Yiga have taken it into themselves by choice. Perhaps their willingness will make no difference, but it might strengthen Ganon's power over them just as the malice strengthens their bodies. I can only promise that I will try. The first indications that they were drawing near to the place of the Yiga's power were the statues. Set atop high shelves of rock or small plateaus, the statues had been shaped into scowling toads, staring up or down with their bulbous eyes. It was hard to tell which. Paya did not look at them in passing, seemingly uninterested in this subversion of the Sheikah aesthetic, but Zelda stared up at them as they walked. One, leaning further out than the rest, let her get a good look at the paper mask that hung down from its face and the face of about half its fellows. Paya, what is the meaning of the symbol of the Sheikah eye? Paya did not stop this time. She must have been anticipating this question, so she whispered as they walked. It is the eye of the goddess Hylia, whose grants knowledge, sorrowfully, to her followers. Sorrowfully? Paya nodded, her earrings swinging. She is the goddess of all time. She can see the terrible purpose of that knowledge, and how it might be misused. She grants it out of necessity, knowing the pain that will follow. Paya flinched, as if just realizing what she had said and who she was talking to, but to her credit she didn't turn around and apologize. Or at least that's my understanding. Grandmother would likely say that I'm being too literal, or too romantic. Above them stood the stone toads, half of whom wore an inverted Sheikah symbol as masks, the same inverted symbol that the Yiga themselves hid their faces behind. Zelda did not know why. She was only curious now, looking at the statues in the quiet of the canyon, but she did not fight the urge to wonder. Inverted, could that mean that they are claiming Hylia's knowledge by force? That they are rejecting the order that the Sheikah see as proper between the goddess and her followers? Or maybe it is simply an inversion in truth, and for them Hylia does not grant knowledge, but obfuscates it. Wouldn't that match with how they broke from the Sheikah and aligned themselves with Ganon? Why would they use a symbol derived from one that exalts Hylia, rather than making one to exalt Ganon, except that the point is the rejection of Hylia's order? She went round and round like that as they flitted between the shadows. Ruefully, she thought how much easier it would be if she could just ask one of the Yiga about it. Paya and Zelda came to a hill. On this hill there was nowhere to hide, and at its crest they could see the entrance to the Yiga base, framed by burning torches. I feel, Zelda said, as if we should be under attack. So do I, Paya said. This is a place where sentries should be. You can see the portcullis where they can see the spot from within the base, and there are rock formations all around us where guards might lie in wait. Please excuse me for a moment, and I will investigate. There is no need. Zelda reached within herself and grabbed hold of the power, reached out with her true senses as the pressure of the malice grew so sharp it was physically painful. Her senses reached out, passing over the empty places where people had, once, been lying in wait. There is no one there. There has not been anyone there for days, or perhaps weeks. It's difficult to tell. The malice is so strong here that it is interfering with my perceptions, and I would need more of the power to block it out. The malice? Air? No. My apologies. That was bad wording. It is coming from in there. She pointed at the entrance to the base. It was only a door, and there were hundreds like it all over Hyrule, but still, something in it was dark and yawned with promises. Pi followed the line of Zelda's finger, and Zelda saw her friend's face in profile. Even without the goddess's senses, she would have been able to see the fear there, the trepidation, the dread. Something in that fear upset Zelda in a way she couldn't put a name to. Paya had faced down 2 blights, had stood with her against the Yiga more than once, had resolved herself to walk with Zelda until the battle with the calamity was actually joined. That Paya should feel fear in this moment, that she was wounded by fear. She, one of the courageous, even she. Zelda almost offered to go in alone. That would have been worse than an insult. It would have been a questioning of Paya's capabilities. It would have been to doubt her very faith. Instead, the princess said, "What should we do?" She called Paya to duty because duty was stronger than fear. She had known that about Paya for a long time. Zelda hated herself for exploiting Paya's faithfulness. Paya snapped out of her reverie, as Zelda had expected, and then stared hard at the entrance. She only spoke after long seconds of consideration. "I had thought that we would don our stealth suits, take only our best weapons, and infiltrate the base together," Paya said. "Slipping past the guards to the heart of the base wouldn't have been simple, but it would have been possible. We would find the Thunder Helm, neutralize the Yiga leader, and be away." Or she shook her head. "I think that I conceived of the base as being essentially shaky. It's not. If the malice is that strong, then it's not even really Yiga anymore. It is of Ganon, and stealth would only carry us so far against the calamity." Zelda waited. "So, I think we should walk in there. And we should be prepared to fight, even if we don't know what shape that fight will take." Zelda ran through many possible scenarios in her head, that the Yiga would ambush them as a body once they crossed the threshold, that some part of the base had been rigged to collapse, that the base was not full of people but of monsters, that there was another blight waiting for them within, and many more besides this. Stealth could have counted for something against many possibilities, but the more likely ones, the ones that were rooted in the fact of Ganon's hate waiting for them, could only be answered by the blade and by the light of her power. She would have to use all of her strength, if that was necessary. Even if it did call down Ganon's wrath, she had to succeed here. She had to retrieve the Thunder Helm. She had to keep Paya safe. She thought, "There are no choices to be made." She said, "Will you help me put on my armor?" In another time, another life, the hall of the Yiga was pristine. It dark, carefully constructed in its confusion, well patrolled, though the patrol had its weaknesses. Even the first chamber that served as a foyer was rooted in a carefully considered pretension of normalcy and harmlessness, and only through the application of thought and fire could the true entrance into the complex be discovered. The sharpest of all the blades of the Yiga patrolled those halls, and their weapons were so fine that they could cut down even the courageous, even the heroic, at a stroke. That was the essence of the Yiga, a blade hidden beneath silk, waiting to be drawn. That was another time. That was another life. In the here, the now, in the version of the world where the princess fell in battle against the calamity, the malice was everywhere, an infestation the likes of which Zelda and Paya had never seen before. The malice had been contained throughout Hyrule by the effort of the Koroks and their guardian, the great Deku Tree. Over the course of a century it had been removed from the ground above the buried Sheikah Towers, from the ruins left behind by battles lost in the fall of the kingdom. It remained in the divine beasts, though Zelda and Paya saw little of those infestations, and it remained at the heart of Hyrule Castle, and now, it was here. Great golden eyes rose on stalks out of pools of liquid darkness, not just on the floor but the walls, the ceiling, the viscosity of the malice so great that it was like a malleable solid. These golden eyes stared at Zelda and Paya, watching, measuring, and Zelda could not have said why, but she felt something behind them, something more than the blights, something more than her dreams of the calamity. But that was a child's fear, and she had no more time to pretend to childhood. The air was thick with the particles of the malice, dancing in the air like snowflakes, tasteless, odorless, dissipating if they touched anything solid, like photons slowed down until they could be counted by the naked eye. Zelda grabbed hold of more of the power. Not so much that she feared Ganon's attentions, assuming that the calamity still sought her death as simply as it did before, and that the lack of reprisal after the Fire Blight's defeat had been a fluke, but it was enough to let her push away the pressure at her temples, to expand her senses until they filled the chamber around them. The malice burned at her awareness, trying to grab hold of her in the same way that the blight had done at the foot of Mount Laniru, but she was stronger than she had been then and pushed it away from herself. Still, she left the berth around the malice where she could, not interacting directly with it, satisfying herself with observing the surroundings.
"There is no one here," she said. "There is a great deal of malice. There are keys behind some of these tapestries. One tapestry hides a stairwell that will lead us deeper in."
Paya was quiet, staring at the golden eyes that were all turned towards Zelda. Zelda wanted desperately to touch her mind, to feel what she was thinking, but refrained.
"It feels as if the calamity is watching us,"
Paya said. She was right, of course. Zelda turned her power on the eyes in this room, 7 of them, bound to an intelligence that was far away. They were, in some ways, more dangerous than the malice itself, but they only observed. They did not attempt to eat away at her strength or supplant her will. 7 of them, on the floor and walls and ceiling. Zelda counted them as she focused her power into them. 7 eyes exploded in flashes of golden radiance. Moments later, huge pools of the malice also evaporated, as if cut off from some vital supply. In seconds, nearly half the malice in the room had disappeared, though particles still hung in the air.
"It will have to make do with your eyes,"
Zelda said. The drips hiding the stairwell were heavy and would have taken a long time to cut through. Zelda and Paya burned them, standing back, watching as acrid smoke mixed with the particulate matter of the malice, and then walked deeper into the heart of the Yiga hideout. The malice bubbled and rolled in their wake, undisturbed by the proximity of its ancient enemy. Barda wasn't sure how long she'd been locked in this prison cell. Couldn't have been more than a day, though maybe only a few hours. She was hungry, but not so hungry that it was turning into an emergency. Yet, maybe it would soon. By the 7, captured by the Yiga. Sergeant Liana was going to be furious. And Captain Teak. She'd make Barda run laps around Gerudo Town for days on end. Weeks, maybe. Barda could already feel the toil on her lungs. And her knees.
"Assuming I ever get out of here,"
she muttered to the dark. Escape wasn't looking very likely. She'd been staring at one of the weird frog statues when she'd been jumped from behind. She had never figured out how many Yiga there had been, but there'd been more than a handful. She liked to think she gave better than she got. Take away from her whatever you wanted to. Barda knew she could fight even if she couldn't do anything else. But Yiga sword masters were nearly as strong as Gerudo, and it hadn't taken too long for them to knock her out. She'd come to here, in this little cell, weaponless but otherwise unhurt. She thought about breaking out, or trying to, but she didn't have the tools necessary. The thick-wooded bars of the cell were rotted through, but what had made them rot was a thick, viscous substance that hissed and bubbled and smelled foul. Barda's mother had raised a fool. Everyone said so, but even a fool could recognize deadly poison when she saw it. She wasn't touching that. No, Mom. Though, she hadn't touched it, or tried to escape. She'd waited. She'd listened. The Yiga were nowhere to be seen, and the hallway beyond her cell was dark and silent. It was almost like she was alone, but she couldn't have been alone, because she felt like something was watching her. Not someone, something. Something nasty. Something big. Something she wouldn't be able to run from. Waiting was about the only thing she could do safely. Sit in one place. Get hungrier, bit by bit. Wait for the Yiga to come back. Imagine how much trouble she was in, assuming she didn't just die. She was crouched down, staring at the floor, thinking, when she heard the voice. "Are you Barda?" Barda fell backward out of shock, then jumped immediately to her feet and sank into a defensive stance. She wasn't going to let them dig her without a fight. Well, not again. Without another fight. "Wait," she said my name.
Yeah. I'm Barda."
2 figures stepped out of the shadow and into the light of the torches, and Barda went through 2 shocks. First, they were not Yiga, which made a little sense since they knew her name. But they also weren't Gerudo, which made less sense. They were little Hylians, barely more than girls. One with silver hair and strange clothes, and the other with golden hair flowing out from beneath armor that looked like it was carved from stone and glowed. "Who in the world?"
"We were told,"
said the girl with golden hair,
"that you had come to scout out the Yiga fortress. Lena, and Kata thought you might have been captured. They were right. Is it just you?
Oh, 7, they have no idea how much danger they're in.
Listen, you two should get out of here if you can. This place is crawling with Jaeger, and something's wrong with them. I fought them when they captured me, and they were stronger than they should have been. I managed to stick one with my spear, and the wound didn't even bleed.
We are aware, the girl with silver hair said.
I'm Zelda, and my companion is Paya,
the golden-haired girl said.
We're here for the Thunder Helm, and we're here to get you out.
Zelda placed her hands directly on the bars of Barda's cell. Barda almost reached out, was about to tell her to stop, and then light exploded from inside the dark stuff that had infested the wood, turning the interior of the cell so bright she had to shield her eyes. Barda heard the sound of water boiling, a hiss like a Molduga's death rattle, and then silence. The light faded. When Barda lowered her hand and opened her eyes, the dark stuff on the wood was gone, leaving behind rotted, corroded bars that she probably could have broken with her hands.
Please step back,
Zelda said. She was holding an axe. Only the blade was too big to be held by a Hylian and made of bright blue light. Barda did as instructed, and Zelda swung, and the blade of light smashed the bars of the cage to pieces before disappearing. The object Zelda slung onto her back was barely bigger than the hilt of a scimitar. Barda stared down at the still smoking splinters on the floor while Zelda spoke again.
Head the way we came and take the stairs into the main chamber. You'll exit this building at the end of the canyon. There are sand seals near the entrance to the desert. Take one.
Barda found herself gaping.
We have other ways to get back,
the silver-haired girl, Paya, said.
Please hurry. There are no Jaeger behind us, but things may become much more dangerous here very quickly. You should get as far away as possible.
The dark of the hallway behind them looked like the throat of a serpent. Barda looked behind them, then at the two girls, then at the broken ruins of the cell gate. Well, who am I to question this?
All right. Good luck, and thank you.
They stepped aside for her. She raised a hand in farewell, and then she ran, sprinting through the dark. Warning. She was good at fighting, but she was also good at running. I'm not going to stop until I get all the way back to Gerudo Town. Fortifications that were essentially guardhouses, built around storerooms, secret alcoves filled with a hissing mass of what used to be fruit, malice, everywhere, clinging to everything. That was the state of the Jaeger fortress. Those who had known it as it was before would not have recognized it then. It resembled less the place where the Jaeger had honed their blades for 100 centuries than it did the infested interior of Var Rudonia. Golden eyes watched Zelda and Paya in passing, these Zelda destroyed with a flexing of the power. Mouths spoke nonsense sounds, threatening to vomit streams of coagulated evil from between their broad teeth. These Zelda left alone, since they seemed unaware of the world around them and did not react when she and Paya passed near them. She thought there were 3 major rooms after the one where they'd freed Barda, but she couldn't be sure. The walls were eaten away in places, turning the hideout into something resembling a single enormous chamber. They picked through it slowly, careful not to touch the pools of malice that would grow, incrementally, if they waited long enough to see the change. The particles in the air were thicker here, glowed brightly enough to see by even in the absence of torches. They came to a door, separated from the adjoining chamber by hanging beads that were arranged to convey the inverted eye of the Jaeger. Pushing this aside, Paya and Zelda entered what must have been the personal room of the master of the Jaeger, Kulga. The miasma hit them like a physical blow and Paya doubled over, adding, not because it was foul, but because it was pursuit. Zelda could feel it scalding the flesh of her throat. She grabbed hold of the power and hurled it outwards, filling the air around them, and there was a sound like the chiming of a bell at the dawn of the world. She grabbed hold of Paya's hand, focused the power into her, channeled Mythos magic to heal the scorching of their airways. Pai looked up at her, rose again, and the two of them stood at the middle of the storm of light. The malice roared and hissed and evaporated like leaves caught in a bonfire, and Zelda felt something behind it pulling back, not recoiling but focusing, and then nothing, and gone. The amount of the power she was using was enormous, dangerous, but if she was right then Ganon should not feel it from Hyrule Castle. Finally, the malice burned away, and she released the power. The chiming stopped, and the room was quiet, and in the dark they stood among the ruins of what had been a place of meditation and learning. Pai lit a torch, setting it in a sconce on the wall. Zelda removed her pack and began taking inventory of her weaponry, deciding what would be best used in the battle to come.
I assumed,
Paya said,
that the Thunderhelm would be here, in Koga's room. The wall at the rear of the room is fake,
Zelda said, checking the emitter on her ancient short sword.
It's also ferrous, so it can be opened with the Magnesis rune. If I had to guess, the Yiga have been working to copy the runes, and have had success with at least that one.
She was muttering, now, but didn't care.
We have to be prepared for that. If the Yiga have that kind of technology available to them, then they might have more, and it's not clear what degree of efficacy they can achieve with it. Probably not up to the level of performance of the Shaka Slate itself, but...
Paya's hand rested on her shoulder. Zelda looked up. Paya was looking down at her with an expression of such perfect seriousness, one that went beyond the bounds of concern, that she did not know how to interpret it at first.
The leader of the Yiga isn't their greatest warrior,
Paya said.
Throughout the clan's history, that's never been the head's primary role. This Koga is probably well-trained and clever, but fundamentally he is not an assassin, he is a priest.
Zelda let that word, priest, roll around in her mind.
Of Ganon, you mean? Yes. Everything that we've seen here, this horror, all the malice, everything, is because of the Yiga Master's communion with Ganon. This is new to the Yiga, just as it's new to us. There's no telling what waits for you past that door, but... for me...
Paya nodded. Tears stood in her eyes, glinting in the light of the torches.
Eva, forgive me. This is very...
She swallowed audibly.
Very difficult for me to say. But I can't follow you where you're going now. I can't contribute meaningfully to the battle against whatever Koga has become. I can only wait for you here. I can only pray for your success.
Zelda got to her feet, looked at the false wall, looked at Paya, who had followed her here to this place, who was willing to die for her. The princess could not imagine the force of will it must have taken for Paya to admit that she could not participate in the fight to come, the pain she must feel in having to express that. Zelda knew that Paya understood this was not a betrayal, it was another form of her duty. The princess in ancient armor put on her back the ancient shield, the ancient short sword, and the ancient spear. She held out the light-scale trident and the boulder breaker to Paya. Paya hesitated and then took them.
I will retrieve the Thunder Helm,
Zelda said,
and then I will return. We will leave this place together. Wait for me here.
Paya nodded, staring at the floor. Zelda took the Shaka Slate from her hip, activated Magnesis, and rotated the back wall. She stepped out into a clearing under the harsh light of the sun. The wall swung shut behind her. Paya exhaled a silent prayer of thanks to Hylia. Zelda had not reached out to her and shared in her thoughts for the entire trek through the fortress. The princess had agreed so readily to her charge's assertion that she did not have time to second-guess it. She never considered the possibility that Paya might have been lying to her. The door swung shut, separating Paya and Zelda with a barrier so thick that Zelda would not be able to hear through it, as was necessary. Paya knelt on the ground. Her shield of the mind's eye glowed with the blessing of the goddess. Hylia, her eightfold blade hummed with the promise of holy work, and in her grip it was surety, and safety, and duty all at once. The Shaka girl tightened the cuffs of her sleeves, let down her hair, and then retied it in a much tighter bun. She set her hat aside and double-checked the fastenings of her earrings. She closed her fists, opened them, breathed, felt the beating of her heart and the pumping of her blood. She focused on her hearing, heard the bubbling of the malice in the adjoining chambers. And, beneath that bubbling, she heard the slow and steady heartbeats of the men and women hiding in a shadow. I am ready. Hylia, protect me. Just long enough to protect her.
I know you are there,
she said aloud, trying to project, knowing her voice not have to carry very far.
You might as well come out now.
She heard as the Yiga began to rise out of the malice, which had cloaked them from Zelda's passive awareness as the goddess incarnate had crept by. She heard deep, steady breaths taken in the open, blades sliding against wood and leather as weapons were bared, the impossibly soft tread of the assassins converging toward this room. There was only one doorway into this room and one doorway behind her. This chamber was the space that the Yiga would need to pass through to assist their master in ambush. This chamber was the space where they would transition from potential threat to active one. They meant to harm Zelda. They had meant to kidnap Paya to that purpose, to use her in their aims, and in this they had failed. They had never considered that they would be found out. They had never considered that the goddess incarnate might be so far above them. They had never considered that Paya would be the wall they could not scale. She got to her feet, placed her sword and shield on her back, drew out the cruel, cutting-edged bow that had belonged to the Lionel on Poemus. She knocked a bomb arrow, which became 3. The Yiga drew near. She could hear them as she raised the enormous bow to her shoulder and pulled the string taut, aiming for the gap in the doorway where the assassins would reveal themselves. They would not pass her. They would not reach Zelda. They would not. Bava ran, and ran, and ran. She left the Yiga hideout behind and did not stop running, sprinting as if every step might be interrupted by shots and blades and arrows, and she had to outrun not just the Yiga but the idea of them. She ran the length of the canyon, passing from light to shadow to light without noticing the cliffs around her. Any observers would have been hard-pressed to keep track of her, so swift was her retreat. Ahead of her she heard the barking of sand seals, and her adrenaline picked up rather than abating. There they are. I'm almost out of here. Then, wait, that's more than 2 or 3. She rounded a corner, colliding with 3 women moving in formation. They braced out of reflex, Barta did not, and was sent sprawling, knocked backward. She scrambled to her feet, then saw the women who had arrived in Yiga's canyon. Oh! There was no malice in the vast clearing behind the Yiga hideout. There was only sand, and stone, and a massive pit, and a man standing on its edge, gazing down into it. The light of the sun shone down on Zelda as she stepped into the clearing. The man must have heard her approach, because he turned to look at her. Koga was not a tall man, but he was lean, well-muscled. It was impossible to see his expression behind his mask, but something in his posture suggested ease and impatience as he faced Zelda. Her first impression of him was how ordinary-looking he was, how anticlimactic he seemed when measured against Paya's fear and Zelda's own estimations of him. He was just a man. Oh, I'm more than that, Koga said, and when Zelda flinched he laughed, long and loud. What?
Did you think you were the only one who can reach out and touch the world around you? Did you imagine you were the only one walking the earth who was blessed? God touched. I am here for the Thunder Helm,
Zelda said.
Surrender it to me. There does not need to be violence.
She understood, as she offered this, that it was pointless. She had to make the offer anyway.
Oh, you are wrong.
Behind her, behind the door, there was a rumble, or, no, more of a thud.
Eyes on me,
Koga shrieked, and Zelda instinctively grabbed hold of the power. A wave of invisible force crashed into her, bone-crushing, and if she hadn't been bolstered by Hylia's strength then it would have pulverized her. She pushed back against it, taking more and more of the power into herself, and did not let up until it was neutralized. Koga laughed again.
Wonderful. This is what I've been waiting for, you know? I've been waiting for you, servant of the Lyre Goddess, incarnation of abandonment. I've been wanting to speak with you, and through you, Hylia.
Zelda drew the power hard against herself, fortifying her body, preparing herself defensively. She had no sense of Koga's strength. He might be as strong as a Hinnock, so he might have been worse than a Blight, but she had to be prepared. Koga reached out with one hand, as if offering it to her grip, and malice boiled from inside of him, smoke and ichor billowing out from behind his mask, from tears in his uniform. His torso shifted and bulged as something moved inside of it, hidden beneath the red fabric.
Let me thank you, Zelda. And by way of thanks allow me to show you the better way we've cultivated. Let me show you our new god.
Ganon's power erupted all around Koga, and the Yiga master charged across the clearing. End of chapter.